This video is sponsored by Ridge. More on them later. Do you ever wonder how many boss fights there have been in the entire history of video games? It's a little hard to work out because not every game places the same amount of significance on boss fights as another game would do. And of course, not every game even has boss fights in the first place, but just thinking about it, like, the amount of games that have been made, it's got to put that number in like millions, surely. It's kind of crazy to think about. I guess you can apply that to any small component from a video game, but boss fights are such an inevitable part of most games out there. They've been around for as long as video games themselves, and you can definitely see patterns start to emerge over the last 4 decades when it comes to incorporating boss fights in an organic way that doesn't feel out of place. And hey, that's fine, and in a lot of circumstances preferable, but I've been around the block and talked about boss fights a ton of times. I want something really strange and unusual to dissect and explain how a boss fight can go so far against the grain that it stands out in an industry that does like to flex its creative muscles from time to time. There's plenty of boss fights that look weird, but the ones that also play weird? Those are in shorter supply. And it's up to me today to find them for your viewing pleasure, and it's up to you to sit there as comfortably as possible and enjoy it. Something that may be a challenge if you still keep your big chunky wallet in your back pocket like some kind of cave person. I myself have long since leapt into the future thanks to today's sponsors Ridge, with their incredibly sturdy wallets that are available in more than 30 colours and can hold up to 12 cards that you can now carry around in your front pocket with a bit of style. When I say that these wallets are sturdy, I mean that they're resistant to chainsaw attacks, and I'm sorry, but your leather equivalent is being turned to pulp in the same situation. Plus, Ridge were also kind enough to send me their waterproof commuter backpack with shock-resistant laptop holder and an external USB port for on-the-go charging, and now it's slightly safer to go outside, I'm gonna be using this quite a lot. Ridge comes with a lifetime warranty, so you can buy one wallet for the rest of your life if you so wish, with a 45-day return window for a free refund if you're not such a fan. Also, Father's Day is coming up and the Ridge wallet makes a great gift. Make sure you check out the Father's Day guide on the site and find the best gear for your dad. You can get 10% off today with free worldwide shipping and returns by going to ridge.com/RabbidLuigi and using the code RabbidLuigi. That link is also in the video's description if you don't fancy typing all of that out. It's time to move your wallet into the future. Okay then, weird, strange boss stuff. Weird stuff! Games that follow a specific pattern when it comes to creating boss fights aren't really what I'm looking for with this video. It's not a bad thing by any means, but I really am looking for boss fights that are completely different to what opposes you throughout the rest of the game. Which brings me neatly to Dark Souls, because while there's no one true archetypal example of a classic Soulsborne boss fight apart from, like, dodging a bunch against something massive, all of these fights are against computer-controlled monsters and their preset artificial intelligence. This means you can learn patterns and enemy behavior to such an extent that you tailor your own strategy accordingly and gradually learn how to beat this powerful opponent. The same cannot be said for one particular boss fight in Demon's Souls that doesn't exactly work like anything seen in other Soulsborne games. How do you change the predictable pattern of your average tricky boss fights? Take the A out of AI. The Old Monk is a fairly inconspicuous boss fight when you first find him, because he's just sitting on top of this giant throne in a room where he's hoarded all these chairs. And, you know, I've seen weird things in this franchise before. You're gonna have to try a little bit harder. Besides, by the time you find him and actually get to his room, he's kind of already dead or just really tired. So, you know, what a wacky boss fight. But the Old Monk doesn't die or fall asleep in vain. Just before doing so, he summons a black phantom and immediately throws a towel around his head so that he can use a real person as a boss fight. Yeah, that's a bit of novelty for Dark Souls. In a franchise full of difficult monsters that you have to slowly solve like a puzzle, we've got a boss fight where you don't really have to do any of that because it's against a fellow human who will more than likely throw out attacks of reckless abandon and, since the old monk doesn't have a lot of health, likely hand you a win on a plate. Alternatively, you can come up against a player who knows what they're doing and you can just feel your hands reach for the switch to turn off your Wi-Fi. Because of course, the old monk only summons a human combatant if you're playing Demon Souls online. Offline, and it's a humanoid enemy with not a lot of health and even less brains, which is barely enough for it to be an optional mini-boss, let alone one of the main challenges in this game. Definitely a fun experiment by From Software and one that I would love to see return in some way in the future, but it has enough eccentricities to it to stand out as a really weird set of circumstances in a franchise that is usually fairly airtight with boss design. You gotta know that fighting the actual old monk would have been a lot simpler. Any game that is set in space immediately has an incredible advantage when it comes to weird and wacky boss fights, because rather than being restricted by familiar settings and comfortable surroundings, we don't know a lot about space. Or at least we can pretend that space is full of creepy aliens with too many eyes and limbs instead of the vast nothingness of reality. And you see a lot of funky designs in games like Dead Space and Metroid and Mass Effect. But hey, what about that other Nintendo space franchise that has been going on for decades and should surely have some bizarre space creatures to tussle with? Star Fox is slightly less exciting than those other franchises for varied boss design, since half of them are Andros in various states of monkey head with hands, but even then there's been a few interesting ideas thrown around that somewhat hints at some untapped creativity on the dev team. Not completely untapped, mind you, since the original Star Fox game hides a hidden stage behind one of the asteroid levels where you can destroy this giant rock that spawns an egg that hatches into a space bird, and then you're warped to a level that isn't even on the map. And frankly, that's the last thing that makes any sense. Out of this dimension is a bit of a trip that is hard to fully process with such an undulating screen, but it's just a bunch of random shapes flying at you and what look like faces in the background. It's a directionless level that you can't escape from, and one that doesn't give you much feedback to how you're progressing through the stage, or at least not until the giant slot machine turns up and, hey look, it's a slot machine. Why is it a slot machine? Also, how do you win a boss fight with a slot machine? You shoot the lever and spin the slots until you get a 777 payout, of course. It's no mean feat, mind you, since you are at least partially at the mercy of random chance, and sometimes you'll get an Andros head instead, followed by a couple of missiles sent your way from the machine, but ultimately getting 777s wins you the fight and beats the game for you? I think the idea is that this is a hidden ending that not every player would know about, but the way in which this level takes you for a trip somewhere incredibly confusing is something else. I hope there aren't any slot machines in real life space. Star Fox is definitely a creatively developed game for its time, for sure, but it's also played very straight. It's trying to be this very serious space shooting adventure. So, gotta say, it pleases me to no end that there is a hidden level in this game where the devs have just decided to go crazy and put a slot machine in the middle of some very confusing point of space. And, you know, it doesn't hurt the tone of the game at all because it's so well hidden. It's just this optional thing that's gonna brighten your day. Although you couldn't get away with this nowadays because, you know, they're kind of censored and cracked down on gambling in, you know, games for underage kids. If Pokemon can't get away with it, sure as hell can't get away with it in Star Fox. This video topic comes into sharp focus when we consider RPGs, because for one of those games to have a boss fight in it that is strange enough for me to give it a second thought, there has to be a lot going on. I recently talked about how RPGs haven't undergone any major changes since the 80s, and while that is true, there is the occasional spurt of creativity when it comes to boss designs and the method used to defeat them beyond just hitting them a bunch. Think about it though, even the end of Final Fantasy VI, with Kefka becoming more and more ridiculously powerful and dancing mad twinkling away in the background, it still boils down to turn-based combat and throwing spells at a sprite. None of that takes away from Kefka being an amazing boss fight, but he honestly ain't all that strange when you think about it. Compared to a final boss fight against an evil plant TV bombs ballet monster, I just... What? Is this how we're ending the game? Are you sure? Okay then, just checking. So Undertale is a bit of an enigma that likes to change up its style from one boss fight to the next. That's part of what makes Papyrus so compelling, because it abruptly changes the dodging mechanic from bullet hell to platforming, and everyone's gangster until your heart gains gravity and drops to the ground. Papyrus isn't that weird though, but luckily things pick up dramatically at the end of your first playthrough once Flowey decides to drop the pretense and come at you with quite literally everything that he's got, with his final form comprising of just about every tendril and set of creepy eyes you could ever want to see. Visually, it's a lot to take in when presented as the final boss of a game that has been deeply rooted in pixel art, but Omega Flowey, or Photoshop Flowey, or whatever you want to call him, is a manic mess of near unavoidable attacks and desperately trying to stay alive long enough to land some hits back onto Flowey. It's a fight that backs you into a corner in more than a few ways and practically forces you to adapt to this dramatic change in style in a game that is known for changing styles on the regular. A lot of people point to Sans being the big memorable fight in this game, but damn, this is not a fight that you forget in a hurry. It's hardly turn-based combat when you're both just flailing around like lunatics. I feel like that's a good design choice. Hey, do you know what game out there really needed more boss fights? Conans Bad Fur that spends most of its time cracking jokes and suffering really badly from terrible level design. But I don't know, there's definitely some boss fights in this game that are enjoyable, but I wish there were more. Is that potentially a side effect of this game not getting a sequel? Possibly, but you know, just give me more ridiculous boss fights. It's kind of what this video is about. I'm just kidding, there's actually loads of boss fights in Conans Bad Fur. Some of them are a little hard to distinguish from funky set pieces where you don't make any contact with the boss in question, like Count Batula and that time you drop that angry bull into the giant pit of shit, but the bona fide fights are pretty varied and very special. You probably know where I'm going with this, and frankly I'd be disappointed if you didn't, because while I love fighting the Terminator spoof and the Exorcist parody, there's something altogether crazier about an operatic lump of shit that is of course an original creation for this game. Does it make the Great Mighty Pooh a lot stranger that he isn't a parody of anything other than the Wizard of Oz bit at the end? I don't think he needs any help. I think presentation counts for a lot here, since on the face of it, there's nothing too ridiculous about the Great Mighty Pooh when stacked up against some of the other bosses you face in Conans Bad Fur. If you saw him in a lineup with all the others, there's nothing major that stands out and tells you that, yeah, this one's gonna be the memorable one, and that just illustrates how perfectly matched together all of this is. A big blob of crap might be fairly normal for Conans Bad Fur, but making him sing is definitely bizarre, and flinging toilet paper at him to put him in the ground or in the toilet is also something that I've never seen in a game before or since. Trying to make something truly one of a kind in a game like this is a very high bar to clear, but the Great Mighty Pooh is comfortably one of the strangest boss fights ever put in any video game, and he isn't even plot relevant. Part of me wishes that Conker tried harder to force him into the story somehow, but I'm kinda glad that he's here one moment and flushed away the second. I need more boss fights that randomly break out into song. You know, I always knew where this was going. Weird games come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes, but from my own personal experience, I found that Japanese games that are proud of that fact and embrace the craziest side of Japanese culture are home to some of the most memorable and strangest experiences I could ever hope to have playing a video game. It's unfortunate that I couldn't find any room for something from Suda51 like No More Heroes or Killer 7, or just anything from the wonderful 101, but as soon as I saw someone mention Nier Automata, with all of its crazy boss fights, including an immersion-shattering fight with the real-life CEOs of Square Enix and Platinum Games, I knew that what I actually wanted to talk about was Drakengard. Hey, Nier Automata is very strange most of the time, but you end up fighting these CEOs like regular powerful bosses, when what I would rather do is a rhythm game. Get 2B on a DDR pad, it'll be fun. Drakengard is relatively straightforward as far as Yoko Taro games go. It's a fairly serious hack and slash that likes to involve your friendly dragon from time to time with some aerial combat to spice things up, and yeah, the game likes to make use of all of this, but generally the boss fights aren't anything too insane. That is, until you fall in love with this game enough to play through the main 5 endings, which will eventually take you on a strange journey to the game's true ending, or maybe just the joke ending. It's hard to tell with Yoko Taro sometimes.
Ending E is a hell of a time, since the main characters and the bad guy get sucked through a portal that takes them all to modern day Tokyo to do battle in the skies above. The thing is though that the perspective shifts from what you've come to expect from previous encounters to a fixed circling motion around the naked statue and an actual rhythm section. Are you fucking kidding me? No, this is real. You need to deflect these rings back by pressing the right button at the right time, roughly to the same rhythm as the music in the background, and that's how you win. It's nothing too ridiculous except for the bit in the middle that is pretty close to impossible without pause buffering, but this is what you need to do to save modern Tokyo from the giant creepy statue. There's a video online that maps the button presses out as if it was DDR, and it just goes to show how absurd this premise is. Evidently, the people of Tokyo didn't like watching this unfold because they scramble some jets and blast the main characters out of the sky with missiles shortly after the fight ends, so well done everyone. To be fair, if a dragon was seen in the sky in downtown Tokyo these days, I'd be surprised if they didn't chuck something at it. These guys were trained on Godzilla for fuck's sake.
This is RabbidLuigi, and the craziest thing about ending E is that while it started life out as a joke ending that no one's going to take seriously, eventually it was molded into the accepted canon of this franchise, and the whole modern Tokyo thing kind of ties into the events of Nier Style and Nier Automata, which is kind of bonkers to think about. What was originally Yoko Taro just writing shit and see if it stuck to the wall actually ended up being incredibly important for the future of this franchise. Clearly what we need to do is just randomly inject some rhythm sections into games that really don't need it. Might just shake things up a bit. Hi, just want to give a quick shout out to some of my top supporters on Patreon. We have Ramon Alberto, Jerome Kiryu, Fusion Warrior, Sarah Malion, Christopher Robinson, Joe Creamer, Scott Riker, Frank Guillong, I think, I'm so sorry, The Green Scorpion, and Devon Hutt. Thank you all for supporting what I do on YouTube, and if you want to join them, you can go to patreon.com/RabbidLuigi, where I post updates and behind the scenes stuff, and we generally have a really good time. Also, what topic would you like to see me cover next? Leave your suggestion in a comment on this video, because I'll be taking the best ideas and making a poll on my community tab, which you can then vote on to decide what the next video is about. I'll be announcing the winner of the poll over on my Twitter, so make sure you follow me so you don't miss out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.